Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Cox, and I'm the host of the New America Movement, and I have my co-host, Jordan. Jordan, say hello.
What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing this evening?
We got a great show today, and we have a very distinguished guest with us today, Ryan Binkley. Did I say that right?
That's perfect.
Okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Dallas, Texas, running for United States President. That's an awesome undertaking, and we're going to spend the next 50 minutes talking about that. So it's an honor to have him on our show all the way from Dallas, and we appreciate you being here today. What made you decide to run for President of the United States?
Well, David, first of all, thank you for having me. Jordan, thank you for having me here. It's great to be with everyone. Love your mission, by the way. I'm watching this movement, and this is why I'm running. I think hearing your message about God and country and family. You know, I am a businessman. I'm a pastor also. So my business, I do, mergers and acquisitions. My dad and I co-founded this business together about 19 years ago, and it's blossomed into a middle market services company, one of the largest in its segment. We have about 350 employees now nationwide and in Canada. And I'm also a pastor. And I've seen these two things break apart in our country, the financial systems of our country, and then the spiritual, cultural side of our country just be completely broken. And God began giving me words in my heart in any way that God would speak to you. He began to speak to me about the desperate need of true wisdom financially, an economic revival in our country, and a spiritual revival, and the time for it was now. And so this is why I'm running. I'm speaking to both of these things because they're truly tearing our nation apart. The division, the hatred in our country is pulling us apart. The political divide is getting bigger every year. So I'm running to transcend those moments, unite our country. Let's solve some big issues together and see our country be the country it's called to be.
Awesome. I guess the big question here that a lot of folks want to know, why did you decide to run against a popular guy like Trump? Because he's always carried a majority of Republicans. I think he's at about 70-something%. What makes you think you would have a chance to run, if I can ask you that?
This is not about me doing calculations and odds and whether I think I could beat him or not. Or I'm certainly one of these guys that just has been hearing God for a number of years on this topic, and he made it very clear to run this election. So it's not because I don't think President Trump did a good job or he's not going to do a good job if he was elected president again, or I'm not tearing him down. I'm simply sharing a message that I feel like God has spoken to me to speak about. So I'm carrying this message of it's time to balance the budget. It's time for us to take care of the dollar. It's time for us to quit the division. These are some areas that I think our country needs to improve on, and I believe they're God's heart. So I would be disobedient if I didn't share it. And so a big part is not because I think I can. I'm a better candidate. Obviously, his polls are 1,000 times more than mine in many ways. So I'm speaking to these issues because I really believe they're on God's heart.
Well, something you brought up a while ago that I think a lot of folks are really bothered about, that is our budget. And it's our debt. We can't balance the budget, and we can't seem to pay back this debt. In fact, we know we can't. I think if they had a plan to balance the budget and they just paid back 1% a year, it would be decades before we would begin to even feel any relief of this. And you're right, you mentioned that in an earlier meeting we had, and this is something I've heard too. Our debt, to service that debt, is almost equal to our military budget.
Sure.
And so if you think about what we're spending in interest, just think about if we were to take that money and put it into more programs in our country, like paying off people's mortgages, paying off student debt. I mean, and I'm not necessarily for paying off student debt, but I'm just saying there's a lot you could do with $800 billion in interest payments a year. And so at some point, it will surpass what we're actually taking in this country unless we raise taxes. Now, do you think inflation is a result of us trying to get more money in the government so we can handle the national debt? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in order to solve the problem for inflation, you have to know what causes inflation. And so in my economic opinion, what truly has caused the inflation that we have today is really about 30 to 40 years of continual deficit spending year after year. So we've only balanced the budget one time in the last 30 years. So when you look at what causes inflation, it's truly an increase in the money supply because of deficit spending. Now, in economic theory, deficit spending should be used in a time of recession. That's when you use it. You're going through a crisis and war. You're trying to come out of the Great Depression. Okay, let's spend some money. Let's buy bonds. Let's loosen up some cash. Now we've done it every single year. And what we're trying to buy now, instead of anything, is trying to buy votes today. So President Biden's trying to buy votes with college students. Well, Republicans trying to buy votes of corporate America and big executives, and we spend the same amount of money. So President Trump done a lot of good things, But we went $7.5 trillion in debt underneath those 4 years. President Biden took that hand off and is doing the exact same thing, maybe more, a little bit more. This is the challenge we're in. We keep doing this year after year. We are doubling our debt every 10 years. And the only way to pay these interest payments and the deficit now, which is $2 trillion a year, is to roll out the printing presses. And this is what causes inflation. So the only way to stop inflation is to start carving out 5 or 6% a year. How are we going to start navigating this? We are 20% over basically our budget every single year, and we put together a 7-year plan to balance the budget. It's pretty aggressive, but we think we can do it by navigating 3 or 4% cost a year.
I think, in my opinion, if we did term limits, we could balance the budget. Here's why I say that. You take an average politician who's in Congress, the only way to fix a problem in a lot of these guys' eyes, because a lot of these elected officials, and I don't mean to sound condescending, but they're not what I call our smartest people, my opinion. And to fix a problem, if you throw money at it, it's an easy way to solve a problem. It's like if you're trying to get votes in areas where you're weak or you want to maintain power, you go in and you do something, you spend that money, you borrow that money, and you say, look what I did. So we're not really good in Congress at fixing problems, but we're very good at spending money. And that's a terrible way to run a country. I think 60 cents on every dollar goes to social programs. Am I right? Something like that?
I don't think it's that high. I mean, right now, it may be close. You're talking about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It's probably pretty close to that.
I'm talking about welfare, housing.
You're talking about from the federal government?
Yes, federal government. Okay. Everything every dollar they spend, 60% of it goes to some form of housing, food stamps, something to do with helping people. And we're not opposed to that, but you can't spend more than you're taking in, because this is the second biggest issue that people have in America is, how are we going to pay this debt back? I think the wall, the immigration is the first one, but wow, if we can't fix this, and I'll say this to you, you tell me what you think about this. I spoke with a congressman about a year ago and handed him up in a corner and I said, hey, you've been in office 2 years. What are they telling you about balancing our budget, paying our debt back? He said, David, when I asked that question, they tell me don't worry about it. Now, he's a freshman, so I'm sure they're not going to say everything to him, but I'd hate to know that I went to Washington and that's the answer I got from my colleagues, that not to worry about it. Well, yeah, I do need to worry about it because my constituents want to know, and we want leadership like you to come up with some way to resolve this. If you are elected president, what would you do to balance our budget and pay our debt back?
Well,
because they're not talking about that.
Well, thank you, David. So the very first thing I would do is do exactly what we're doing right now, and really by video to the American people, look right into the camera. What Trump did with Twitter, we're going to have to do with video, social media, Instagram, Facebook, national news, and be honest with America about the consequences of our current path. So the consequences of our current path, what if we keep spending $2 trillion more than we bring in? We're $34 trillion in debt. It's going to be $50 trillion in about 6.5 years, just doing the math. So what's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence of that is hyperinflation. The consequence of that, and it'll go up and down. But already, Jerome Powell, he made an announcement just a few weeks ago. They want to cut rates 3 times this next year for political reasons only, I know. They've never done that before, the Fed. And now they've already backtracked on that and said, well, we don't think we can do it because inflation went up last month. So we're going to be on a spiraling, if I could do a graph, it's going to be a spiraling up and down, but spiraling up inflationary environment for the next 20 years unless we solve this problem now. So we can't kick the can down the road. And what does that mean? That means that young people will not be able to buy houses today. That means that young people will not be able to afford key things that they need in life. And I say young people because they're on the growing end of the income scale. If you own a home already, you better stay in the house, because getting a new one at the same level is going to be very difficult unless you're paying cash. So inflationary environment is destroying the wealth of America, and it's actually destroying the middle class and the lower income people the most. And the reason is because if you don't own an inflationary asset like a house, then you are getting destroyed financially. So I've got to tell America, this is the problem with our current, you can't keep doing the same thing. So how do we do this? Well, I picked the biggest expense in the federal government, which is healthcare. Healthcare is 35% of the federal budget today. The other 10% is going to be interest payments, and then the military after that. Then you got some other social programs. But at the end of the day, about 25% of it's non-defense discretionary. So I'm going to go after non-defense discretionary spending and healthcare. And I'm going to start with healthcare because I have dove into this every way from Sunday from insurance providers to big pharmacy benefit managers to the big pharma companies themselves to the healthcare providers. It is a system of monopolies. It's the only thing we purchase as Americans today where we no longer go into the doctor and we ask, how much does it cost for me to be here? It's the only thing you purchase. You don't buy a car without knowing how much it costs. You don't buy lunch at a cafeteria without knowing how much it costs. You don't buy a house that way. But we buy healthcare every single day with not knowing. And then we find out 90 days later when we get a bill, oh my goodness, that was $25,000 for me to be there, honey. Thank God I've got insurance. And then what happens? Your insurance goes up 20% next year. And you're like, whew. Good thing my company's paying for 70% of that, and you don't really see what's happening. Now it's hit a tipping point, so we better dive into these systems. I've got a plan to revitalize. I would call it a Republican alternative to socialized healthcare. We're going to bring that in, get rid of 30 or 40% of the waste in healthcare, which we can do, and it's a long conversation on that alone. But once we do that, we can balance the budget in 7 years, and that's what our plan is. It's an aggressive plan, but I've never hit a target that I didn't aim at. When's the last time you went hunting or you went skeet shooting and you just blindly started shooting skeet without actually aiming at it? The United States government doesn't aim at anything anymore. And every one of those Congress people today are not even thinking about balancing the budget because they don't think it's a problem. It is a problem. For the bottom half of America, the problem is them. They don't have the voice that they need to have.
One of the things that I've noticed in the political world is guys like us that are business people. I'm a businessman. I'm a real estate holder. And I have to make things work. I can't get up every day and say, well, that'll work itself out. If I don't have an answer and I can't fix it, it's going to cost me a fortune down the road. So I have to be on my toes. I got to know what the problem is. I got to find a solution that works. But you know what? All business people are that way. If you have a mechanic shop, you got to make a payroll on Friday. You got to make sure that Monday through Thursday, you took enough money in to pay your mortgage or your rent, your insurance, your guys that are working for you, your parts and material, and have enough to take home. We understand that. The problem is a lot of people in Congress have never ran a business. They're not capitalist thinkers. They may say they are, but they've never been a CEO. They've never run a business. And they're just getting elected and hoping for a good day. And when they see these problems, they don't have very easy, smart, educated solutions to them. Like you say, just kick it down the road. It'll work itself out. But it hasn't done that. And that's why I try to say to people, we really need smart CEOs to run for office that can get involved in Congress and can find solutions. Because to me, it's almost like people in Congress don't want a solution. They don't want an answer.
They do not.
It's like the border. When you start saying, hey, let's do this, we'll think about it. And there's so many issues in this country that you have to say, well, this is what I would do. Oh, no, that's not going to work. Because you and I are talking about solutions. But isn't it obvious and isn't it scary that Washington doesn't like to find answers?
Well, you're exactly right. And so this is the other reason I'm running. I mentioned, first of all, economically, I saw this vision with our country. We're falling off a financial cliff. There's a storm coming we're not ready for. We're not ready for another COVID. We're not ready for another war.
Okay, hold on 1 minute. When you say a storm, I've heard
bigger
you say,
than we're in right now.
Talk about it. Because
I haven't seen it.
Because I think people hearing that, what are you talking about when you say storm? You're a financial advisor. Tell the people in America what that means to us.
So right now, we're on thin ice. If I can just put it any other way, we are on thin ice financially. We're on thin ice as far as the money supply that's available today in America, meaning the cash in your bank accounts, my bank accounts, everybody in America, it's called M1 money supply. What's readily available cash within a CD or something like that, up to $100,000. That is the lowest it's been since the Great Depression. So we're not ready for another storm. We're not ready for a COVID. We're not ready for a war. If there's anything that caused another inflection point, like a COVID happened 4 years ago, we are in desperate trouble. And the reason is because if anything happened to the economy that was drastic, people are going to be out of work. They don't have any money left. Our money supply is gone. What I mean is our personal bank account money, not for the rich. The rich are doing okay, but for the middle class and the poor. So that's the kind of storm I see coming. We better start navigating this. And I think it's this too. We need God shining on our nation again. Everybody's tried to kick God out of every conversation. But I'm telling you this, throughout Scripture, this is the pastor side of my life. Whenever there's a war, whenever there's a famine, whenever there's a plague, those are signs of God leaving that country alone. So you can look in Ezekiel. There's another thing that happens when they leave. It's called wild animals running through your land. But I think when I read that, I'm like, 3 of these are happening right now. Is anybody looking up to God? When's the last time? You remember out of 9/11 happened when we or we're all in church the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Everybody's in church after 9/11. Why? Something had happened in our generation that had never happened before.
Tragedy.
Our nation was attacked on our land, not since 1941. So so we are all of a sudden in church. Now when COVID hits, something that's never happened in a lifetime. Was anybody really looking up to God? Were the churches full? No, they were kicking you out of your church. Was any of the government saying, hey, now's the time to pray? So we've left God out, and now we're wondering, God, what's happening? Why are we going through this, God? Why are we in this war again? Why are we in endless wars? Why are we facing this? War is a sign of judgment, not against Ukraine, not against Russia. If it is against them, why are we paying for it? So it's really a sign that the entire nation has left the Lord. And all I'm saying is this: we have to start showing care for one another again. The most hurting in society, use wisdom financially. We've got plans, and this is why I get back to your financial question. How come they don't come with solutions? It has become a business of politics, and it's become a business of 30-second answers that go viral on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or TikTok than coming up with real solutions that work for America, because we're in a culture today where the goal of each party is to see the other party fail rather than see America succeed. And as long as we stay in this environment where even our party leaders are just stoking division, they're doing it all day long. We will never transcend the moment, because we haven't had a president that's transcended our party, or even the Democratic Party, since Ronald Reagan. And I think it's time again that we lead higher, start coming up with real solutions that matter, and stop demonizing everybody that disagrees with us politically. You remember Ronald Reagan had an adversary named Tip O'Neill. But when they would argue, they'd go have a beer and a burger together one night, then they'd argue again the next day, but eventually they would get something done. That's the way we need to lead today, and we better start thinking that way. And when we do, we'll get our country back on track.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and the sad part is too, it's on the Republican side as well. Like if you don't agree 100% with, let's say Pickens County Republican Party, I'm just going to say it just because it's just the truth. They toss you out. Like you're gone.
I missed that. If we don't agree with who?
Like with Republicans.
Let's just call it Trump. Can I do that? Is that safe to do here? If I don't agree with President, he's the leader of our party. We're in a situation now. If I disagree with President Trump, and I've seen this online. Now, it's not that because I want everybody to know. I agree with President Trump on 80% of stuff. But if I even mention, hey, what if we did it this way? If we thought about balancing, but do you know the feedback I get?
Yeah, so right. Living in right here where we live at, that's the feedback I get from the Republican Party. So that's what I'm trying to explain, is that it's yes, we got to fight the left, but we're too busy fighting each other.
Yes.
And the problem is the left isn't fighting each other. They're not going to war with each other.
That's true.
The moment you have a Democrat that's up for election, guess what happens? All Democrats rally around them. They got them. And so with us, it's, well, we don't like this guy. Well, why don't you like him? Well, we just don't. Let's go with this guy. And go back to his point about experience and about getting people that are elected that like know what to do, experienced people with solutions. The problem is that even on the right, we don't do that.
So are you suggesting that we all just agree together? Or
No,
are you
I'm
suggesting
I'm
hash it out?
No, I'm suggesting that we got to come together, like you said, talk, communicate.
Right.
But it don't happen like that.
You're exactly right.
It does not.
You're
Even
exactly
on the
right.
Republican side, that's my point. The moment you come, so let's say the reason I bring up Pickens County Republican Party is because I don't agree with everything they do. They have a leader up there that I don't agree with, stuff that he does. He does stuff that's backroom deals. This is the candidate we're going to push. Whatever you say doesn't matter. Actually gotten emails and stuff. And I'm not trying to this is just a point I'm making. And so we come to the table saying, hey, why is this? Why is it this way? Why won't you hear from us? Why won't you let the other candidate speak at the candidate forum? Why is it just your candidate speaking when other candidates are there? Why can't we hear from all of them? We get back stuff like, oh, well, we didn't have time. We didn't have, and it's like, well, no, you did.
You're exactly right.
And so it causes division in the Republican Party. And so now instead of fighting the left, what we're supposed to do, because you're right, morality and Jesus is out. It's gone out of this country. We done kicked Jesus to the curb. But Republicans have done it too.
Absolutely.
And so we got it until we can look ourselves in the mirror, and I'm as conservative as they come. I believe in the having the family, mom and dad. I believe in not going and killing babies. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in freedom of speech, whether you like it or not. Like the best way I've heard it is there's speech that you hate, and then there's freedom of speech. There's two different things. Like, just because you hate what I say, don't mean I can't say it, right? And so the whole thing that I'm getting at is, until we can come together as one party, not the big Republican Party, and then we just all come in together, until on the state level, until we can come together and say, hey, we're going to stop the infighting, because it's not just here; it's everywhere. I'm sure you've been all across the country. I'm sure you've talked to people that's got similar stories to stuff like this, and it's a problem, because we're getting our butts kicked by the left and letting them run a ramp all over this stuff, getting rid of Jesus out of schools, getting rid of the American flag is race. Like, we're doing all of these things that we're like 5, 6, 7 years ago. That was insane. It was insane to think the American flag would be racist. Now it's we got 2 national anthems. Like, all of this stuff is a product of division. And until we can sit there and say, hey, we got to be able to say, we're both Republicans, we're both conservatives. I may not agree with you 100%, like you said about Trump. Like, I don't agree with Trump 100% on everything. But until we can say, hey, look, but I agree with you on the main issues, on the big issues, on
Absolutely.
the issues that matter. I don't care if you got a lab and I got a golden retriever and we're debating on which dog's better and you don't like me. That does not push the country forward, right? So the point I'm making is, until we can come together as one party and say, look, we're not going to fight each other. We're going to fight the Democrats. We're going to fight the left. And that don't mean go out here and just pick a fight, but what I'm saying is coming together as one, like they do. They do that. They come together and they throw support behind their person, and no matter if it's local, no matter if it's national, whatever. And that person 9 times out of 10 is going to be a race, whether he wins or loses. He's going to have to put some money into it because they got all the backing. With us, if you don't have the backing of the Republican Party, or if you don't have backing of whatever, you have no chance of winning nothing. You have no chance of doing anything. And they pick and choose whether they like you or not.
Well, when we started this race, because I care a lot about unity, and I care a lot about our nation coming together. And when President Biden ran, he mentioned this. We're going to bring our nation together because President Trump, he's going to stoke the fire, right? So he does a lot of good things, but he doesn't mind agitating the enemy. So, right. And then they get him, but they get back at him in certain ways. And so, but anyway, he's big boy. He can handle it, right? So it's amazing. But at the end of the day, we have to have some things to unite on.
Yes.
So it's impossible for a president to go, hey, we're going to unite our country, but let's do it all my way.
There you go. Yeah,
so what I'm saying is this: I don't think we should compromise our issues. So I've tried to pick a few things that are important to Americans. Whether you're independent, Democratic, Republican, inflation is kicking everybody's butt. Mm-hmm. We better come together on a real solution. Can we get an economist, by the way, on board? Does anybody study macroeconomics anymore? Does anybody in Washington, D.C. know an economist? Because I can pull out any macro 101 book and they'll tell you what causes inflation, but nobody seems to know up there in D.C.
They're not biologists either.
Can we get that done, right? And then because we can fix that if we want to. Second thing is big issues like the border. We can fix this. Right now it's a political issue. We're in election season, so we're throwing things back and forth. We can fix this. President Trump's got some good ideas, but it has to go further. We've got 22 million plus illegal immigrants in our nation. You can't deport 22 million. So this is the soundbite attitude I talk about, David, sometimes that I've seen. Whenever the soundbite is, we're going to kick them all out. Boy, the red meat to the Republican Party is like, yeah, let's get them, because they've seen 7 million people come in. But, when you're talking about 22 million, you're talking about 2% of GDP, maybe more. You're talking about no food by Friday. You're talking about construction projects that take a year and a half now, taking 3 years. Are you sure? Do you want to think about this thing first? Now, I would agree. Mass deportation, I don't disagree with Trump at a certain level, but you're not going to kick out 22 million plus people. So how are you going to do it? And whatever we do, we better do it with the heart of God. So I think this, big issues. What are we facing together? Let's unify on them. Let's control our border. Let's seal the border. Let's come up with a great plan. Let's get our inflation under control. Let's fix healthcare. This thing that's bankrupting our nation. Let's lead across the world. Let's save the U.S. dollar, because if we can save the U.S. dollar, China will listen to us. So will Russia. But if we have a weak economy and weak leadership, they'll keep doing what they're doing today. Every time Putin's advanced, you look at it, he took over Crimea when? After the 2007 and 8 financial crisis, the Great Recession, and when a weak leader named President Obama was in office. When did he move again? During this current administration, another weak leader, President Biden runs out of Afghanistan. Putin goes, I think I see the leader I want, and he moves in again. He's playing cards, right? We're playing checkers, or he's playing chess. We're playing checkers. So this is what we've got to do. Strong leadership, strong dollar, and we'll lead, but unite on some of these key issues.
What's interesting is America is not run on great ideas and leaders. It's run on power. And whatever you can do to get power to maintain it, that's all they want. And it's on the Republican and Democrat side as well. And until we can move beyond that and look at real life issues that affect people, bringing leaders to the table, that it's not all about them, but it's really about the country. I think that's what people kind of liked in Trump. They felt like he's the guy fighting for them.
No question.
Because nobody's doing that in Washington. Nobody's paying attention. These guys get elected, and they've got a 90% chance of being reelected regardless of what they do in Washington. And it really aggravates a lot of our people seeing that. And so Trump coming like a bear, I think it excites a lot of people to say, somebody's going to finally listen to me.
Yep.
But here's an issue. You pastored and you're pastoring now. One of the things we see really dividing America, especially in the church, and I want to get on this subject a little bit. We know that if the church came together, we could have our way on anything.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If enough people got together, we could do what we wanted to do in this
churches
country.
are in America.
But that's not going to happen. Now we got the big issue.
Why, though?
Well, let me say this.
Why?
I have a thought on that.
Go ahead.
Yes, why?
Go
But-
ahead.
But I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so we're talking about the divisive church, right?
Yep.
Not coming together behind one candidate. I pastor a multicultural church, so there's a lot of people in my church that are other races than I am, and many of them are not Republican. The Republican narrative is this: how can somebody that's a Christian vote for a Democrat? This is what's commonly held because of our issue of pro-life, and I am pro-life, and I don't believe there should be some 20-week parameter trying. Yeah, I'm pro-life, which means I believe Jeremiah 1:5 says that it started there in the womb, before the womb, if you can wrap your mind around that one. But the parties, Christians are divided on this because God is not a God where he doesn't see people. He sees people. And he mentions in Psalm 98 that the foundation of his throne is righteousness and justice. And so there are certain issues that the Republican Party is strong in and certain issues that we're not strong in. And we are strong in righteousness issues, definition of marriage, biblical definition, sanctity of life. Or I say this, we could be better at it even, but we're getting stronger at that. But some areas we could improve on: God's heart for the poor, God's heart for the immigrant, the widow, the orphan. I think we're stronger in some of those areas. But we need to be able to care for if we want to truly change the culture of life in our country. It's not just asking a young woman in a moment of crisis, do the right thing. I prayed about this a lot. God said, Ryan, a lot of these young women don't even know me. You're expecting them to make a godly decision when a lot of them aren't Christians. He said, what if every Christian in America adopted all the kids that need to be adopted? What if we reformed foster care and started adopting all these 10 and 12-year-olds instead of letting them age out at 19 and be on the streets? What if we started an adoption movement through the churches and we started? Now that's a justice side of things. Yep. How do we show justice to somebody that's poor? It's not through the government giving him more money, but this is what the Democrats have. They want to give the poor money. Right. I think we can give them money, but it shouldn't come through the government. It should be the churches and charities doing it. And I think when we start doing our job, because Jesus never said hire the government to go take care of the poor or your neighbor. He said you do it, right? So you love your neighbor. So that's kind of been my message. And I think when we focus on key issues that God cares about, but we do it, I would say this, a Republican alternative to socialism, there's a different way to do it. I think we're going to win people. You know, we only won 46% of the last election. Republicans. We only won 4 of the top 50 cities by population. We lost 46. If we don't start connecting to the poor and the immigrant, we're not going to win. We're not going to transcend this moment. But if we don't have to give more money away, we don't have any money. But I'm saying this: we can show love, we can show care. I think when we do that, we'll start to unite on key things. That's my view.
Okay, let me ask you this. The big thing that I'm seeing with pastors today is the LBGT community. A few more letters I could add on that, but for the sake of time, how do you see that fitting in the local church today? Because you're a pastor, you pastor a good-sized church. I've pastored 35 years. It's different today than it was when I started. I don't know what it's going to look like 5, 10, 20 years down the road, but this is a big issue that pastors are dealing with. What's your thoughts on that?
So, you can ask me as a presidential candidate and then as a pastor. I've got a few different views on it, but they coincide the same. As a pastor, I teach the Bible. I teach the Bible with love, though. 1 Corinthians 13 says you can have all the wisdom in the world, but if you don't have love, nobody's going to listen. So I've actually got a transgender person coming to my church. There's gay people that have been there. They don't always stay long because I tell them the truth. And look, I just taught on sex 2 weeks ago, biblical definition of sex. I talked to single people, by the way, too. And God has a lot to say about sex, and it's not just to the gay. It's sex outside of marriage is a sin. Period. So, you can start to rattle out of cages. Jesus took it to another level, said if you even look upon a woman with lust, that's adultery. Well, that now you're rattling a lot of cages. And then further, when you look in Galatians and Corinthians, he gives lumps, he gives categories of sin, and he starts talking about adultery, sexual immorality, fornication, which is sex outside of marriage, but he also talks about alcoholism. He also talks about envy and jealousy. So as we categorize sin, God kind of lumps all these together and said, those that do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, here's talking about, does that mean it's bad to be envious and jealous as much as it is to be, commit a sexual sin? Well, I don't know. God didn't rank them. He didn't put them in order of priority, I don't think. So we do, though, and I tell people, if you don't think one's more important to your wife, just ask her, would you rather be envious or, be unfaithful? She'd rather you be a little envious on occasion. But God sees our heart. So I teach the truth in love, and I say, listen, you're on your journey in Christ as a pastor. If you're coming here, you want to know truth, I'm going to tell you what the Bible says. Now, as President of the United States, listen, you have a right, and it's now law. Okay, that if you want to be, if you're LGBTQ community, you have certain rights, and I respect you. Is what I've had college students LGBTQ line up, and I said, listen, you're in college, I respect you. If you want to live your life that way, that's okay. Here's what I'm asking in return: is that you respect. I've got 2 daughters. You respect the fact that if they wanted to compete in sports in high school, I'm asking you to also respect that they compete with somebody fairly with their biological sex. I'm also asking you to respect that if they want to change clothes, that they should be able to do it in privacy. Would you do that? And you know what I saw? This is at a town hall in New England College. I saw the swords come down, and people just said, yeah. Because I'm not demonizing them every day. They're people. They're in a journey. They're on their own journey. I've got to kind of look at them through that. And I feel like we can raise the narrative of respect and love, and we can share things without me highlighting everything that I think is wrong with the way they think, and just go, I think we can change the discussion. That's the way I would try and do it as president.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off that, and this is just my opinion too, is there is, like you said, there is a fine line when it comes to being a pastor and talking to these things and stuff like that. But the thing though that I see with the church is that and even in politics, even with politicians. It is the fact that the moment you say something, even if it is in a nice way or something like you're respecting them or whatever, and then they get offended about it just because you had the audacity to ask the question, or just because they feel entitled or whatever it is, and then you get bashed for it. So I feel like a lot of these churches and a lot of these politicians aren't going to come and say stuff just on the simple fact of, well, I'm going to get all this backlash and I'm going to get attacked and I'm going to be on the receiving end of cancel culture or what, all that stuff. And I totally agree that we got to love everybody. Doesn't mean we got to agree with everybody.
Right.
Got to love everybody. I totally agree. And I totally agree about the whole, you got 2 daughters. You would not like a man going in there and changing in front of your 2 daughters. I mean, I don't. Most fathers wouldn't. And so the way I see it is, if we could have the church come together. When I mean the church, I mean Church of God, Baptist, everybody, the church come together and say, look, like we're going to take a stand on this. The problem you're seeing is that most churches got rainbow flags up in their churches. Most churches, like there's one in Greenville that's celebrating like drag queens coming to their church and stuff. And so it's when you see stuff like that, when the church gets perverted, morality's already out, and now the church gets perverted. Where do we go from there? And like as a politician, and as someone who could lead as a Christian, I guess the question would be like, what would you say to those churches if you could say anything to them at all? Like, would you tell them to something like, hey, like, keep doing what you're doing? Or would it be something like, hey, like, listen to the Bible? There's probably a little sideways here.
Well, as a pastor, I would say teach the Word of God. As a president, you have to respect the fact that we in our Constitution, we've got this thing that says freedom of religion and the right to express that. That also includes the right to express no faith at all. I had an atheist coming to me after one of these podcasts I did in Iowa, and he called in and asked a question. Ryan, you're talking about turning back to God and why we need to do that as a nation. I'm an atheist. Where's the separation of church and state? And just kind of getting angry with me. And I said, listen, you're an atheist. I want you to know this. I'd have to be willing to die for your right to be an atheist. If I'm going to support and defend the Constitution, that's part of what it says. Meaning that our Constitution affords all sorts of churches, all sorts of religions that believe different things. So what I recommend as a pastor, as a Christian leader, hey, I believe in the Bible, believe in church. Sure, I would encourage everybody because I love God and I think that God's word is truth, and I would encourage that. But at the same time, I don't think you can, as president, I would sit there and say, listen, I want everybody to be sure, not as president, don't go to these churches.
Right.
You know what? Go where you feel led to go. At the end of the day, I believe in a Bible-believing church, and I believe you should study the Bible and you should go to the church that teaches the Bible. But I would leave it categorically at that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too is like we're separating the, like you said, the pastor side of me and the politician side of me, and you got people like us that are praying for Christian leaders. Right, like we always say, we need godly leaders. We need these leaders. So how do you separate the politician from the Christian?
Right. Here's how. When people come to my church, they're actually coming to learn about what the Bible says about certain areas of life that they're dealing with. Whether that be anger, whether that be a drug addiction, whether that be a marriage issue, whether that be how to raise kids, whether that be how to walk in righteousness, how to know God, how to hear God's voice. They're coming with an interest in knowing what does God's word says. As president, they're not electing me president to know what the Bible says. They'll go to their church for that. But I can share with them fundamental thoughts because I believe this, that you look at the Declaration of Independence, it talks about, our creator in that. And I do believe this, that it's okay for me to also express my faith as a president. I have that right in the Constitution. And I can say, listen, I think our nation needs to love God and turn back to God. Now, what does that mean? I think when you look at Christ's words, he broke down this really simple: love. One, God is love, and love your neighbor. And that your expression of your love for God, David, would be shown by your love for other people. So how do we do that? Well, I think it starts with the most hurting. I think Jesus, he hung out with the most hurting. He didn't always hang out with the politicians and the Sadducees and the political religious
Very
leaders.
rarely
You know how many political religious leaders? I mean, there are more. And now I'm talking about programs like this. I'm talking about people that are using their political and religious for influence and gain. There's a difference. There's a fine line, but there's a difference. And so Jesus didn't spend a lot of time with those guys. He would hang out with the person at the bar, right? Or the person at the drunkard. He was known to be a wine bibber or a glutton. Well, I think if we did a little bit more of that, we connect to a lot more people. We show love, show care. I have this thought. There's big problems out there, but just do for one what you'd want to do for all. It's an old Hebrew teaching. Save one life, save the world entire. I think if we can do a little bit of that, we'll make some moves in our country.
Okay, let me throw something at you. I'm a big supporter of Israel, and I know that you are. Why do you think college campuses are supporting Hamas, shouting from the river to the sea?
Well, I think this, it's a very political environment. You've got young people today that are listening to their voices of influence. We're growing up in a church that's not really, in an era where church is not really a big part of everyday life, and the Word of God isn't. And they don't even know history. So if you look at our nation today, it's a nation of everybody, multiple religions, multiple faiths, multiple ethnicities, so many different things. And then you look at the Middle East and you go, okay, what nation in the Middle East allows other religions? What nation in the Middle East allows different people of different races to come? Well, the only one I really know of is this nation called Israel. In fact, Jews have been kicked out of almost every other Middle Eastern nation. So you look at some of the problems that are there throughout all the Middle East. Well, which nation actually has Christians, Muslims, and Jews living in it and protects their right to worship whatever God they want to worship? And so Israel, I would try and teach people about, hey, look at Israel. They're not perfect, but goodness, no other nation surrounding them allows you can't be a Christian and really thrive in Iran.
We say that all the time.
How many Jews live in Iran today? I mean, how many Jews are in Egypt today? How many Jews are in all these other nations surrounding there? And so, we're in a proxy war with them right now, with Iran is what it is. And so Iran is the one subsidizing Hamas. And people have to know the difference between Palestinians and Hamas. Hamas took over there as leadership there. They haven't had an election in 17 years. They're a terrorist organization. You have to educate people. And I think I would try and educate college students. Say, listen, the goal of Hamas is to destroy not only Israel, every single Jew, but also America. Do you know that? Do you know that, by the way, you're here in America? Thank God you're here. And by the way, we're all Americans here. And I would try and get them to remember that we're actually all one family. And when you even look at the different religions of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, we all come from the same Father. You just trace it back. We all believe in God, and so there's different paths to, the way they believe that should be done. But at the end of the day, I'd have to remind them that we're in America. We're all Americans first. You should not be protesting a Jew because of where his ancestors were born. Do you know what our nation's about?
I thought we went through that already.
This is what we're talking about. So I'd have to educate and truly communicate. And let's win the battle of rhetoric. Let's win the battle in love. Let's win the battle in truth. And just over and over again remind them. And if they have the right to protest, but you better do it peacefully, or you're going to be in jail.
What's interesting is Israel's had this problem for over 70 years. Hasn't gotten any better. And about every 10 years, there's this upheaval between Israel and Hamas. And sometimes it does involve other countries like Egypt and Iran. And, of course, Hamas is a terrorist group elected by the people of Palestine. And there's no really easy answer for this. I travel to that country a lot. I'll be there again in a few months. I would say to the American people that if you're not careful, you can get caught up in an ideology that's almost like a social construct where you're thinking these thoughts and it's so far removed from any reality. For example, I was talking to a young kid one time who was a graduate of Clemson, just graduated. And the subject came up because it was a political conversation. And he said, Israel is apartheid. And this is a guy graduated from a major university. And I said, it shocked me because I'm like, how do you think Israel is apartheid? Well, he said, my professor told me so. So the point I'm making is that, logic and reason is only going to take you so far. Education and wisdom will excel where it's wanted, but it's almost like there's this spirit over people to where reality and truth is confusing to them. Because when you're hollering from a river to a sea, you got to remember they just went through that 70 years ago in World War II. It was a genocide through Hitler. 7 million Jews were killed. And now you're calling for the same action again. That's taking place in our borders, in our country, among our Ivy League school. This is not people who are uneducated, underprivileged people who are just jealous. These are our future politicians and leaders, our doctors, our lawyers and our judges who have this ideology that Israel is the devil and that the Palestinians, they need to be set free. The problem with that is if we don't get leaders in Washington that will maintain a very positive pro-Israel stand, we're going to be in trouble. And right now you see that eroding away. As the president of the United States, if you're elected, how will you maintain that?
Well, let me back up real quick. You know what I think we need today do you remember the story about Josiah in the Bible? Young king that found the scriptures, found this old book, and was like, wow, we're not doing anything like this. This thing says, and all of a sudden revival started happening in that land. I think it begins there. We need an awakening in our nation. So how do you really change government? Well, you have a whole generation of leaders that start running for local office, national office, to be a congresswoman, man or woman, or senator. It takes an entire movement of people to go, hey, let's do the right thing. Let's use wisdom. Let's use everything you're talking about, values. Let's have respect for other nations. Let's look at Israel. Israel now is the first nation that we actually entered a full free trade agreement with in 1950. We supported them early on. Of course, you mentioned the atrocities they walked through. We need to stand with them today. So as president, what would I do? I would continue to stand with them. The Bible says it very clearly in Exodus that if you bless Israel, you will be blessed. I want God's blessing on our nation again. Now, does that mean that they have a carte blanche right to do whatever they want to do? Absolutely not. I think I would bless them. I'd help them. They had their 9/11 moment. This was a 9/11 moment on October 7th, and as a percentage, likely even much bigger. And atrocities that we have never even heard of here in our nation or haven't seen, babies being beheaded. So we have to remember that, and I would stand for them to get rid of Hamas at every level. At the same time, I would communicate to America that I think it's important that we treat our allies that way. And Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East. That said, I would encourage them to have as much humanitarian care for those in Palestine, not Hamas. But there's a difference between Palestinians and Hamas, trying to distinguish that difference. And then also make sure that we're leading that effort. And Israel's got to thread the needle. I mean, to get rid of Hamas and to make sure there's humanitarian care and saving as many lives as they can, that's not easy. I think they're trying to navigate this storm the best they can, but I would support them in doing so. And any effort we're making to keep funds from them, I would stop immediately.
Next question. Do you support troops on the border?
Yes.
Talk about it.
Well, right now we have an open border. We've got a lot of problems. Not only 7 million people coming in, as we just found out here, the full number came in the last 3 years. We've got fentanyl coming in, killing 100,000 people a year, mainly young people, 18 to 45. And it's 2,000 people a week. And because they're hidden and because they're not all in one spot, the media is ignoring it. And the media is ignoring it because it doesn't fit the Democratic narrative. So I would secure the border with whatever it took. Now, do we need the military there? I think you could do it other ways. I think, as I mentioned before, we need legislation long-term. So there's a short-term plan, a long-term plan. Short-term is military there. It's enforcing the border. It's keeping our nation secure. So I'd do that right away. Long-term, I would work on a legislative plan where we're getting Congress, getting money, at least $30 billion to fund the war and on a yearly basis. So 30 years from now, our grandkids don't have to worry about an open border. It's taken care of. It's part of the laws of our nation.
Yeah. I was telling someone the other day, we talked about Trump coming in, fixing border, said that's fine for 4 years. But if you get Gavin Newsom back in 4 years, he's going to reverse everything. You're right back where you were. So not only did Biden reverse the policies that Trump set in place, he extended it so far that those numbers almost doubled under his administration in 4 years. And so laws under a president doesn't matter unless it's long term.
Well, and I agree. And I think this is why I think this. And I would tell President Trump this today, and I would tell Mike Johnson this today. I think both of you are making a mistake. And the mistake isn't that you're right. Biden's border plan was not good. It wasn't great, but there were some good things in it. And why I say it's a mistake is that lives matter. 100,000 lives in the next 12 months matters. Now, a lot of it's going to happen anyway, but what is going to happen, all these drugs come in, some of these kids are going to die next year and the year after that as well. So we're allowing millions of people to die. There's enough fentanyl to kill every American in the United States. So the reason I say it's a mistake is come back with a counteroffer. Give me 3 things you want for a deal to be done. I mean, President Trump, I would tell him this. He wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. The best time to get a deal done is when the other person is weak. Biden is getting destroyed. I mean, if you really want the best border plan, I think that now's the best time to do it. Do you think if you're president of the United States and the Democratic Party is going to work with you, all of a sudden magically work with you on a border plan? Are you kidding me? They're not going to work with you. They're going to stonewall you at every chance. And so you'll be able to secure it with the military, but long term, are you going to have a plan when you get out of there? I don't know. So I would say this, take advantage of it now. In fact, rename it. Call it the Trump wall. Call it the Mike Johnson wall. Call it whatever you want to call it. But let's get a deal done. That's what true negotiation is. And the best time to do it is when the opposing party is weak, and Biden is weak right now. Now's the time to really get it done. And everybody's going to know that it was the Republicans that got the deal done. Everybody's going to know it. You're going to get the credit for it come election time. And this is what I would tell Trump to do and what I tell Mike Johnson to do today.
Yeah, awesome answer. Jordan, close us out.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in to New American Movement. Please comment, like, share, and follow. And please check us out on Big Patriot Radio on Mondays at 7 p.m. You don't want to miss it. We've got a great show. And thank you so much for being here. It was an honor. It was great to have you. It was one of our better shows. Thank you so much. And God bless.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show. May God bless you. And we appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you. Take care.
New American Movement, thank you so much for tuning in today.